I would like to invite everyone this morning to grab a seat at a table, but I'd also like to invite you to join me on a very special journey through creativity and innovation. Our journey will take us through Israel's most creative thinkers and doers as we explore cultural, civic, technological, medical, agricultural, and other innovations which originated in Israel and have changed the world for the better, crowning Israel as the startup nation. Avi Yorish will lead us through this fascinating journey for the next about 45 minutes, and then we'll take questions. Avi is a seasoned entrepreneur and Middle East expert. He is the senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council and the founder of IMS, a merchant processing company that services clients nationwide. A thought leader in exploring global innovation trends, the Arab world, counterterrorism, and illicit finance. Avi is so cool when I read that out loud. I'm like, counterterrorism? You're not just writing books, you're like fighting crime. This is amazing. And Avi previously served in the US Department of Treasury and Defense. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Binghamton University and a master's degree in Islamic history from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He also studied Arabic and Islamic philosophy at the American University in Cairo and Al-Azhar University, the preeminent institution of Sunni Islamic learning. An author of 5 books, Yorish's articles have appeared in influential outlets including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, Forbes, and AlArabia.net. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and Entrepreneurs organization. Most recently, Avi published this book, Thou Shalt Innovate. It is the story of how Israelis are helping to feed hunger, cure the sick, protect the defenseless, and make the desert bloom. I had a chance to spend a little bit of time with Avi yesterday, and I want to tell you, this book has now been approved to be translated into 26 different languages. The 27th is right on the horizon. I'm just curious because I felt epically stupid yesterday. Has anyone ever heard of the language Tagalog?
Yes.
Okay. So the 3 of you get an extra copy of the book on your way out that will later be translated. You have to actually begin and help with the translation into Tagalog. This language is spoken by 70 million people in India. It really is, though, at all times, a statement of how much we all are desperately looking for answers to tough questions. And innovation appears to be that. We all spent a moment together last afternoon, yesterday evening, watching as we learned about innovation and great incubators. I do want to take a moment and just acknowledge, I thought yesterday was one of the best professional conference events I've seen in a really long time. So well put together, a huge round of applause. And I congratulate all the staff with Leah, as I think the lead from it yesterday, really pulling this together. And so I think that's what we should be listening with today. The ears of trying to figure out, while this subject might not be uniquely about something that's happening in our center or in our lives, but it's how we solve problems. It's how we use innovation to create creativity. How are we not the only ones in our JCCs that are innovating? How are we taking back the skills that we learned, that one nugget from today, so that we can spark new ideas from all of the staff at our JCC? Because the answers are probably there. There are probably people who are right at the front line or working in our fitness centers or teaching swimming lessons that have all of the answers if we figure out a way to create a culture of innovation. And I can tell you that if Avi has written a book that is now about to be translated into 27 different languages, I think he's got something to tell us. So please welcome to the stage, Avi Yorish.
Thank you, Mark. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be here this morning. There's a few people who I want to at least point out. We've been friends for a long time, and certainly were a large part of the journey as I wrote this book. Zach, where's Zach Bodner? Zach Bodner, who I'm very grateful to call a friend and a colleague, was instrumental as I wrote this book. Leah, thank you again for bringing me here today. And there's a few other people in the room, Rabbi Septimus, Ruben Rogoreski, and Jody Sperling, who I haven't seen in over 20 years. But we went to Hebrew University together a long time ago. Let me start off with just a little bit about myself and how I got involved in tech, because I was not a tech guy. I was born in New York, but made Aliyah with my family when I was a very young child. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. And I start with that because it really has cast a long shadow on my career. The idea of how do we emerge from that dark part of history and really bring more light to the world. I came back to the States as a teenager. I did my undergraduate work at Binghamton University, and then I did my junior year abroad at the Hebrew University. And that is where I really started the exposure to the greater part of the Arab world. And then moved to Cairo for a few years, where I studied Islamic history and Arabic at Al-Azhar University and the American University in Cairo. By show of hands, has anyone heard of Al-Azhar University? So a few of you. Al-Azhar University, of course, Michael, sort of being Italian. Al-Azhar University is the oldest university in the world. It's over 1,000 years old. Half of the members of Al-Qaeda graduated from Al-Azhar University. So it is the preeminent school of Sunni Islamic learning. It's the place where you really go to study Quran, fiqh, hadith. Really is an exceptionally interesting institution. I then moved back to the States in 2001, and right before 9/11, and started working at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. At WINUP, I wrote my first book on Hezbollah's Al-Manar television. By show of hands, has anyone heard of Al-Manar? Always shocks me because Al-Manar, there's only two people in the room. Al-Manar, up until very recently, had more viewers combined than Fox, MSNBC, and CNN combined. All of you, I'm sure, have heard of Al Jazeera. Yeah, Al Jazeera. Yeah. Al Jazeera gets about 35 to 40 million viewers a day. The next station down is Al Arabiya, which gets, again, between 30 and 35 million viewers. And Al-Manar is owned and operated by Hezbollah, a terrorist organization that I'm sure we are all familiar with. And I interviewed them for the book and then waged a campaign against them. I essentially tried to take them off the air. We were fairly successful. I brought together a coalition of Muslims, Christians, and Jews who banded together in order to try and remove them from satellite providers all over the globe. Up until 2004, 2005, they were broadcasting on 14 different satellite providers around the globe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I managed to convince, at the time, 12 to knock them off the air. And then the Saudis and the Egyptians were the last holdouts. And then when the revolution took place in 2011, the Egyptians knocked them off, and then the Saudis 2 years ago took them off the air too. So Al-Manar no longer was able to broadcast. I then worked at the Treasury Department for 3 years, tracking illicit finance, where I looked at really how Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and other bad actors raise and move cash. From there, I went into the intelligence community for a few years and did the same sort of thing. Helped stand up threat finance cells to, again, help the intelligence community really push these guys out of the formal financial sector. And then my last book was on Iran's banking sector. In 2010, I published a book called Iran's Dirty Banking. And there I really focused on, I named and shamed the 59 banks around the world that were helping Iran march towards the bomb. So they were, not to get too technical, but there were 59 banks that were essentially allowing them access to the international financial sector. And the way to knock them off was to tie the nexus between the United States, these banks, and Iran. And Congress passed a law called SAZADA, which I worked very closely on with Zach in 2010, the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Investment Act. And if you look at that law and you look at the book, you realize they're one and the same. And that is eventually what forced Iran to the negotiation table. So I will tell you from there, I essentially, in 2000, we have 3 kids. And I take my kids every summer to Israel. We move our entire family. And up until the summer of 2014, I was running my companies. I really have a real estate company. I do credit card processing. And I do this Israel habit thing, which for me has become an obsession. In 2014, I was really juggling all the various things I was doing. And then my life really changed in 2014. I arrived in Israel on July the 5th. And I won't forget the date because my kids were very angry at me that we missed the fireworks on July the 4th. And we arrived in Israel, and I went to enroll my then almost 2-year-old at a preschool. And the preschool teacher, I'd already coordinated at halftime, she looked at me like I had literally arrived, like I'd grown a second head. She said, "Mr. Yorsh, what are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean? I'm here to enroll my child at your preschool." And she said to me, "Haven't you heard? There's a war that's about to break out. You ought to go home to America where it's nice and safe." And then it was my turn to look at her like she had grown a third ear. I said, "First of all, we are home. And second of all, no one's going to steal my child's birthright. Not Hezbollah, not Hamas, not rockets, not anything. Enroll my child at your school." And she did it, I want you to know, albeit reluctantly. And then 3 days later, as we were driving home from that preschool, I heard the most horrible noise of my entire life on the radio. I heard the sound of the code red, and literally my stomach turned, and I thought to myself, ooh, this is really not a particularly good idea. I'm home, but I should really not have a toddler in a war zone. It's one thing to make a decision as an adult to do this, but it's quite another to bring little babies into this situation. And I took my kid home, and we did story time, and we did tubby time, and you all know the regime, but I knew exactly what was coming. And 3 hours later, we heard the sound of the sirens, and I took my terrified 2-year-old down 4 flights of stairs, and we huddled with the rest of our neighbors. And they looked more terrified than my 2-year-old did. And 10 minutes later, our building literally violently shook. Friends, do you know what that sound was? That was the sound of the Iron Dome. That was literally the sound of the first time in history that humans had figured out how to drop a projectile out of the sky. So a missile comes and literally something takes it out of the sky. Friends, up until that moment, we'd only experienced that in Star Wars. We'd only experienced that really in the movie theaters. This was the first time in human history that we had figured out how to take a projectile out of the sky. And when that took place, we all knew it was safe to go upstairs. And I took my kids, all good. But that scene repeated itself over the course of the summer. That summer, we spent a lot of time in bomb shelters and a lot of time listening to the Iron Dome going off. And I was very intrigued by that story. On the one hand, I will tell you, I became extraordinarily depressed. By the end of the summer, I looked at my wife and I said, I am done with this part of the world. I'm done with Iran marching towards the bomb. I'm done with Syria descending into civil war hell, with ISIS beheading journalists in Iraq, with rockets being fired in from the Gaza Strip. I am done with this part of the world. I'm going to focus on our marriage. I'm going to focus on the businesses. And I'm going to focus on the kids. And Diane, I've done my, can you hear me now? All good. If you haven't, if you haven't turned off your phone, I would be grateful if you just put on silence or put it in your pocket. That'd be great. I literally looked at my wife and said, that's it. I've done my bit for the Jewish people in the state of Israel. I'm done. And on the other hand, almost by accident, I began noticing all these technological innovations that were coming out of Israel. Up until that point, I, for one, had never really paid attention to that portion of the state of Israel. And I realized that Israeli innovations were improving the lives not only of millions of people, but of billions of people around the world. I thought, there's a really interesting story here, not just from a technological perspective. We all know Israel is the startup nation. I'm sure each and every one of you is sick and tired of hearing startup nation, startup nation. Friends, I got news for you. Israel is much more than just the startup nation. Israeli tech is truly curing the sick, helping the needy, and feeding the hungry. It is literally improving the lives of billions of people around the world. You all know all too well that there are more companies listed on the NASDAQ, more Israeli companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country in the world other than China and the United States. Israel has more startups combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. And Israel, as many of you are aware, up until last week, Israel was number 10 in terms of being the most innovative place on the planet. It's now on Bloomberg as rated as number 5. Israel is a very, very innovative place. But I will also tell you, we have to have some humility as the Jewish people. Israel is not the most innovative place on the planet. It's highly innovative, but it's not the most innovative. Our value proposition to the world, Israel's value proposition to the world, is curing the sick, feeding the hungry, and helping the needy, and that really is reflected in the companies that Israel is pushing out today. And if you'll allow me, I'll just go through a few of the examples. I'll talk about where I think this actually comes from, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So, how many of you in the last 6 months or a year have gone to Israel? Raise your hands. So almost everyone in the room has been to Israel. If I were to have a heart attack, Leah, right here, right now, what would you do? You would call 911. And on average, 20 minutes anywhere in the United States and Israel, an ambulance would come saving my life. Now, if I were to experience a major heart attack, 20 minutes, way too long. I'd likely be dead. In Israel, those same statistics hold true, but a country that has experienced terrorism and war over the course of the last 70 years, 20 minutes, far too long. And so my friend and colleague, Eli Beer, created an organization called United Rescue, or United Hatzalah, in Israel. And the genius of what he's created, he's done really 3 things. First, he has created an organization of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, all emergency responders. Okay? So one is this idea of an army of emergency responders that leverages the entire population of the state of Israel. One. Two, all of you have smartphones in your pockets, hopefully on the vibrate mode. And when you want to go out for dinner or you want to go to see a friend, we don't call cabs anymore. That is so 1995. What do? We press a button and we quote unquote, we call Uber or Lyft, right? And what it does is it geospatially locates the 5 nearest cabs to come and pick you up, okay? But instead of picking up a cab, what Eli Beer did was he geospatially located the 5 nearest emergency responders, those that have been trained to save lives, and he gave many of them an ambucycle, which looks like a Pizza Hut moped, but instead of delivering pizzas with a box in the back, it has medical supplies. Does anyone know what the national average is in Israel to bring an emergency responder to the scene of a medical emergency? It's 3 minutes. Friends, and in every major city in Israel, does anyone know what that number is? It's 90 seconds. I don't get to say Scooby-Doo, and literally someone comes to save my life. Now, that would be extraordinary in and of itself. But now I want you to put on your JCC hats for just a moment, and let's bring it back to how does this potentially impact each and every one of you and each and every one of your communities. The first community in the United States that has rolled out this model is Jersey City. Jersey City is the first, but there's no reason why this is a model that we cannot employ in every major city in the United States. We have hundreds of thousands of emergency responders. Every one of us has a smartphone, and I think we can put a couple shekels together for some ambucycles. Now, I should also tell you that this model, to some degree or another, is in 20 countries around the world. And that, I think, is really extraordinary. For a country that literally has, at this point, 8 million people, it is leveraging its entire population to do this sort of thing. All right, so now let's move on to water. All of you might be aware of the fact that Israel is the world's one and only water superpower. We spent a lot of time in the Jewish community talking about water, but I want to take a step back and really bore into how Israel declared itself to be a water superpower. Israel today is the one and only water superpower. It doesn't rely on the weather or its neighbors for its water consumption needs. And I want you to keep in mind, Israel is a country, 60% desert. 60% desert. I mean, literally, Israel should really be in the hole, proverbially, when it comes to water. And it did this using 5 different innovations, some of which were created outside the country, and some of which were created inside the country, but all of which were perfected inside the country. The first is desalination. Desalination was created in California in the mid-1960s by a Jewish guy who made Aliyah, who perfected it at Ben Gurion University. Israel has 5 desalination plants, which provides somewhere between 60 and 70% of the country's potable water needs. Now, desalination, to be clear, it takes water from the ocean and turns it into sweet drinking water. Israel today has built over 400 desalination plants in 40 countries around the world, including the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere in California, the largest desalination plant in India, and the largest desalination plant in China. 2, drip irrigation. Some of you may have gardens and may be using drip irrigation. You can certainly get drip irrigation at Home Depot. It's these little plastic tubes. They emit a micro amount of water. To be precise, it emits 1/3 of the water, and it doubles the yield. That technology today is used by over 1 billion farmers around the world. Leaving aside all of you gardeners in the room, we're talking about over 1 billion farmers are leveraging drip irrigation. And an interesting fact, of all the arable land in the world, only 5% of it today is using drip irrigation. Netafim this past summer sold, I don't remember the exact number, I think it was $15 billion to a Mexican company, because they realized that only 5% is being 5% of the arable land of the world is actually leveraging this particular technology. Let's talk about recycling of wastewater. When we go to the toilets, right? We in the United States and around the world generally think of wastewater, toilet water, as being a nuisance. Sewage, not so pleasant. In Israel, it's probably one of the most valuable commodities you can buy or sell. To be clear, your human waste in Israel, very, very valuable. So here's the way it goes. When we flush our toilets in the United States, water authorities clean the water 1 to 2 times, and then we essentially release it back into our oceans, into our rivers. Fine, nothing special. In Israel we clean that water 5 times, and then you actually recycle 90% of that water and recycle it for agricultural purposes. Technically, you could drink that water, but the thought of drinking recycled wastewater is a little disgusting, but I got news for you. It's coming to a tap near you. Literally, that technology, we're all going to be drinking sewage water in the next 20 to 30 years, because 40 out of our 50 states in the United States are going to experience massive, massive water shortages. For those of you who read Seth Siegel's book, Let There Be Water, you know this is a water problem that is coming to every one of your communities in the coming 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And Israel has a solution to this, and frankly one that I think can tie our communities around the United States to the state of Israel. Now, Israel recycles 90%. Does anyone know what the next country down, other than Daniel was at my talk a few weeks ago in Austin, does anyone know what the next country down is? Spain. Who said Spain? Give that man a brownie. It is Spain at 18%. Does anyone know where we are in the United States? On a good year, nationally we're at 7 to 8%. For the you Yiddish speakers in the room, that's Gornish McGornish. That's literally nothing. Okay? We have a lot to learn from the state of Israel. The next innovation is Takadu, which sounds Japanese but is very, very Israeli. It's an early warning detection system that is in every major city in Israel. It's attached to the pipes, and if there's a drip, if the pipes break in any way, water authorities know about it immediately. That technology is now in dozens of cities around the world. And lastly, this is my favorite. It's a 2-button toilet. This is rocket science, friends. You ready? Number 1, number 2, big flush, little flush, okay? And as a result of these 5 innovations, Israel has created this water superpower. Now let's talk about why I think that's important. Egypt, a country that I lived in for a few years and has 100 million people, in 6 years is going to have a water problem of biblical proportions. Friends, Egypt is running out of water. In 6 years, no more water. We're done. Iran, a country today that points its missiles at the state of Israel, in 20 years, this is a country with 80 million people. In 20 years, 50% of its population are going to become water refugees. Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, large parts of Europe, certainly Africa, and even the United States, the same trend line holds true. And Israel is the only country in the world that has figured out how to become a water superpower. Let's go for a few other innovations that are interesting. Parkinson's. Does anyone in the room know someone who has Parkinson's? Raise their hands. So a large number of you. So for those that are afflicted with this horrible disease, it's a horrible neurological disease, you often get something called deep brain stimulation. You basically stick an electrode into the brain and you pulse it. Okay? It's like a pacemaker for the heart. Deep brain stimulation was created in France in the 1980s by a Frenchman named Elie Louis Ben Abid. But in 1989, a professor at the Hebrew University, Chagai Bergman, discovered that if you literally stick this electrode into the basal ganglia, which is the base of the brain, and you pulse it, you can reduce, not eliminate, reduce the symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's. The only problem is if you don't get to the exact spot in the brain, you can either turn someone into a vegetable or kill them. And so as it turns out, scientists have discovered that every part of the brain emits a unique sound signature. So one part of the brain makes, beep, and another side of the brain makes boop. Like just different sounds. Every part of the brain emits a unique sound signature. And so my friends and colleagues, Imad and Reem Yunus, not Jews, live in Nazareth, started a company called Alpha Omega. For those of you who have read the New Testament, that's a reference to the book of Revelations. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Their company essentially created the GPS for the brain, which allows brain surgeons to get to any part of the brain with complete accuracy and allow these brain surgeons to pulse the brain. That technology today is used in hundreds of hospitals around the world. I would venture to guess in every one of your communities there's a hospital that is leveraging this GPS, and hundreds of hospitals around the world. And I think speaks to the diversity of the state of Israel, which we will get to in just a moment in terms of I would say the secret firepower. Where does the spirit of Israeli innovation come from? Let's talk about, I want to talk about back surgery. Has anyone had back surgery recently? Okay, so a few of you, 2 of you. Israeli, a company by the name of Mazor Robotics, which exited 2 months ago for I think a cool $1.4 billion, created the world's first artificially intelligent robot that allows anyone having back and more recently brain surgery to actually map out the surgery ahead of time using 3D CAT scan X-ray and then have the actual robot do the surgery for you. So a doctor is physically in the room but really presses a button and off it goes and does the surgery. That technology has never had, it has a 0% failure rate. 0% failure rate. Now, when I say failure rate, it's never pinched a nerve, it's never caused someone to be a paraplegic or a quadriplegic. Let's talk about paraplegics and quadriplegics. ReWalk is a device that I hope all of you have seen, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to go back to your rooms later on today and check out, just Google ReWalk. My friend and colleague Amit Gopher experienced a horrible ATV accident about 25, 30 years ago, and he snapped his neck and he became immediately a quadriplegic. In other words, he lost the use of his arms and of his legs, and he became understandably depressed. And he looked to nature and he thought, okay, I've lost use of my spine. I wonder if there's an animal in nature that has not a skeleton, but rather an exoskeleton. And he discovered that there are armadillos and there are crabs and scorpions that have these skeletons on the outsides of their body. And so he set out to create the world's first exoskeleton. If you haven't seen it, it's this device that hugs the legs and it has a battery on the back. And 10 years ago, the world's first paraplegic stood up and walked. Can you talk about the lame walking again? Literally, the proverbial lame walked for the first time in history. And 5 years ago, the world's first paraplegic ran the London Marathon. We've now experienced that dozens, if not hundreds of times, that you have your paraplegics that are running marathons. Okay? I'll go through one more because this is a quintessentially Jewish story. I feel compelled to at least tell it in this particular audience. By show of hands, how many of you know someone who have multiple sclerosis? Almost everyone in the room. There are 2.5 million people that have multiple sclerosis. The two top drugs in the market today, Copaxone and Rebif, treat over 1/2 of the individuals with multiple sclerosis today, both of which came from Israel. Let's talk about the story of Rebif. Michel Revel, a Frenchman who also comes from a family of Holocaust survivors, made Aliyah in the 1960s and took a position at the Weizmann Institute, and he became obsessed with interferon protein. Does anyone, I'd be surprised unless you've read my book. I did not know this before I wrote it. Does anyone know where the largest amount of interferon protein is found? If you've read my book, please don't answer. Where's the largest amount of interferon protein located in the human body? Any ideas? Anyone? It's found in a newborn male foreskin. Okay, you can't make that up. And Michel Revel thinking, okay, I live in Israel, I can have as many newborn male foreskins as I want. I'm in business. The only problem is, does anyone know what we do with our newborn male foreskins? We bury them. And the Mohalim refused to give them to Michel Revel. So Michel Revel used another amazing Israeli technological advancement known as chutzpah, and he had a member of his staff, a member of his staff who worked for him was related to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Okay, she was his niece, and he sent her to 770. He sent her to Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and she got a bracha. She got a blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and within a few weeks, Michel Revel had 30 newborn male foreskins. Okay, and then you add $2 billion and 15 years later, and he creates the drug known as Rebif. Rebif today treats 600,000 of the 2.5 million individuals that have multiple sclerosis. And I love that story because I think it ties in Jewish culture, Jewish history, a little bit of humor. But all kidding aside, let's peel back the onion. Where does the spirit of Israeli innovation come from? And after interviewing hundreds of innovators, all the private equity guys, professors, people of all walks of life, I've come to a few conclusions. G.K. Chesterton, a great British explorer who came to the United States in the 19th century, he wrote that the United States is a country with the soul of a church. Friends, I've come to the conclusion that Israel is a country with the soul of a synagogue. And let's peel back the onion. If you look at if you read how many of you read Startup Nation? Startup Nation is an amazing book. I encourage you all to read it. It basically talks about the economic miracle that the state of Israel represents. But there are really, friends, there's nothing new about Jews making money. Really, this is about the state of Israel. Really, if you peel it back, Israel making money. My book is not about making money. My book is about impact. My book is about tikkun olam. My book is about really feeding the hungry, helping the needy, curing the sick. And so the question again is, where does this come from? And I believe it rests on three legs of the stool. One is this idea of diversity. Israel is one of the most diverse places in the planet. You have Christians, you have Muslims, you have Jews. You have Christians of every shape, every stripe, every denomination. You have Muslims, you have Sunni, Shia, Arabs, Bedouins, Circassians, and obviously Jews from all over the world. Then you have secular values. I am not a religious Jew, but that doesn't make me any less or any more of a Jew. And Israel is a country that really idealizes, it reveres its secular institutions, primarily the military and its universities. All but one of Israel's universities are secular institutions. Now, the last part about this is the prophetic tradition. And I want to talk about this really not in a religious context, but in a cultural context. So let's talk about the prophetic tradition. For the last 1,500 years, our people have been praying 3 times a day the Aleinu prayer. And the Aleinu prayer is unique in that it calls for us letaken olam b'malachut Shaddai, to repair the world in the image of God. We believe that we are on the planet to spread morality and social justice. The Mishnah, the classic body of rabbinic teachings, no less than 10 times instructs us all to engage in tikkun olam, or repairing the world. The prophet Isaiah calls upon us to be a light unto the nations. But when you really think about it, what the prophet Isaiah is really telling us to do is to bring more light to the world. And if you haven't been listening until now, I'm going to share with you the secret of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. On Friday night, I bless my children, and on Saturday night, what is the quintessential prayer that we make on Saturday night? What is the bracha that we make at Havdalah? What is it, friends? Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ve'or lechoshech. Right? The separation between the holiness and the mundane and darkness from light. Friends, at the very center of all of Judaism, the very center is this idea of elevating the mundane and making it holy. Whether you're religious or not, secular, Orthodox, Reform, conservative, the very kernel of Judaism is this idea that we are here to elevate the mundane and make it holy. We bless our children on Friday night, we make Havdalah, the circumcision, you put food in your mouth, you go to the bathroom. It's all about making brachas. It really is elevating the mundane and making it holy, and frankly, bringing more light to the world. Now, if you ask Yossi Vardi, how many of you know who Yossi Vardi is? So all of you, whether you know Yossi Vardi or not, are using his technology. All of you use instant messaging. Does anyone remember from the 90s, ICQ was the first company, right? Like I'm going back to the dinosaur ages. ICQ sold to AOL for like $1 billion. That really was the beginning of instant messaging today, and that is the platform that we all use. Yossi Vardi's had 35 successful exits, and he's like the guy in Israel. Yossi Vardi always reminds me, he goes, Avi, we are not a nation of saints, but we are a nation that has been seeking higher meaning for the last 3,000 years. Now, when you think about that, whether you're secular or religious, this idea that we are all here to bring more light to the world, that's an amazing concept. And that is a concept that deeply influenced the founders of the state of Israel. 70 years ago, Ben-Gurion stood at the lectern and he said, my friends, 2 things. First of all, he stood and he said, he called into existence the state of Israel. He said, after 2,000 years, the gates of Israel are officially open. Officially open. We have been waiting, my friends, for this moment for 2,000 years. The gates are open. Now, that is a right that has been given to each and every one of us. Now, I'm not telling you to go make Aliyah and move to Israel tomorrow. Israel needs a strong diaspora, and the diaspora needs a strong state of Israel. But that right has been given to each and every one of you, your children, and your grandchildren. And that right is never, ever going to be taken again. And that truly is a unique moment in history, to be able to say that we are finally come home. I tell my children, and my children I think intuitively understand, you can live wherever you want in the world, anywhere you want. Miami, New York, San Francisco, Albuquerque, Tokyo, wherever. But we have one home. And that is, we've been waiting to say that for 2,000 years. Tikva v'shnot alpayim. Now, Ben-Gurion stood at the lectern and he said something else. He said, I quote, "We have been granted the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 20th century." He seemed to be saying at the very heart and soul, at the very center of the state of Israel, was this idea to enrich and protect the lives of those who live in the country, but also to help enrich and protect the lives of people all over the world. Now, we in the United States have tended to think of this idea of tikkun olam in terms of doing like mitzvah runs and marching on behalf of curing AIDS and multiple sclerosis. In Israel, I believe this idea of tikkun olam is taken a slightly different bend in terms of leveraging its best asset, tech, to improve the lives of billions of people around the world. Now, let me be clear. This is not the only story that truly encapsulates the state of Israel. We all know, every one of you in this room knows perhaps better than anyone, that Israel has no lack of problems. Problems with the Palestinians, problems with water, between the very rich and the very poor. Israel has a tremendous number of problems. But this is a story all too often that is not told in our communities, and I believe could potentially represent the strongest tie in our communities in the United States and around the world to really this hopeful vision of the state of Israel. I say this as the child of Holocaust survivors. Okay? My father was born in the camps and I was raised by my grandparents. We, for all too long in the United States, particularly, we have raised our children on a steady diet of basically tying our children to the state of Israel either through the Holocaust, and we're seeing these horrible images on television. It's just a fact. How many of you have kids in college these days? A lot of you. And we're all dealing, certainly in your JCCs, you're dealing with this idea of BDS. And not a lot of us have answers to these issues when it comes to BDS. These are very painful images on television, and the story here, the conversations that we are having are painful, and they're not pleasant. And I'm not here to tell you that I have the answers to all of these questions, but I am here to tell you that I believe that the strongest tie that we can give our children to the state of Israel is through this more hopeful vision, this idea of curing the sick, helping the needy, and feeding the hungry. And that's not just a good story, that's a fact. That, my friends, is just a fact. Israel has its problems, but this is also one of the primary stories of the state of Israel. I want to tell you another story about my children, and Zach has heard me tell this story before. 3 years ago, I came home from work, and I could tell that something was very wrong. My wife gave me that look that I knew something was not quite right. And my wife looked at me, and she looked at my oldest son, and she said, "Aiden, tell your father what you've done." And my 5-year-old at the time was not entirely psyched to tell me what naughty thing he had done. And so my wife very sheepishly came over and said that he told a homeless person that he was a very bad man. And I was a young father, and I thought to myself, this is not a good moment. And so I thought of my Holocaust survivor grandparents, and I thought of my innovators, quote unquote, my innovators. And I asked my son to get his shoes on and his coat on. We live on Capitol Hill in Washington. It was March, and it was fairly cold. And so we got about halfway down the block, and I knelt down and I said, "Aiden, why did you tell that homeless person that you are a bad man?" And Aiden didn't know the answer to that question. I said, "Was it because he was black? Was it because he smelled of urine? Was it because he was surrounded by plastic bags?" Why would you say that? In the most really descriptive, calm way, I knelt down and looked at my child at eye level. He didn't know the answer to that question. And so I said, "Aiden, what are the 5 rules that we have in the Yerush home?" Because in my home, we only have 5 rules. Only 5 rules. We believe in a mission statement. We've got 5 rules in our home. Yeah. And he was all too happy to tell me the 5 rules. Rule number 1, be a mensch, not a wilde chaya. So for those of you who don't speak English, literally means be a good person, not a wild animal. Okay, be a mensch, not a wilde chaya. And interestingly, my mother lives in Aventura. It's not far. I brought he's now 3.5. I brought him 2 weeks ago to Miami. This is a true story. Literally, we walk in the door, the first thing my 3.5-year-old tells my mother, first thing he says, "I'm a mensch, not a wilde chaya." So I can assure you, even 3.5-year-olds know the difference between being a mensch and a wilde chaya, right? All children know the difference, right? Be a mensch, not a wilde chaya. Rule number 2, do your part to make the world a better place. Rule number 3, never ever give up. Rule number 4, try your hardest. Rule number 5, try and have a good time. I said, very good, Aiden. What do we do when we make a mistake? And Aiden says to me, we do tzedakah. I said, that's right, Aiden, we do tzedakah. And friends, you all know that the root of the Hebrew word tzedakah isn't charity, but it's justice. Really, it's social justice. So I said, Aiden, this is the way this is going to go. We're going to find that homeless person. You're going to give them a couple bucks. You're going to shake their hand. You're going to look them in the eye, and you're going to say, God bless you and keep you safe. He said, I can do that, Dad. And so we walked for a few blocks, and we find a group of homeless people. It's not one, it's actually 3. And I can tell you it was not a particularly happy scene. It really was, it was not a happy scene. Aiden, true to form, marches right up to this guy, hands him a couple bucks, shakes his hands, looks him in the eye, and says, God bless you and keep you safe. And do you know what happened? We had a very awkward moment of silence. This kid's looking at this guy, this homeless person looking at my kid. And then do you know what happened? He hugs my child. He hugs my child. And these 3 guys, they're high-fiving, and they're laughing, and they're having a good time. You can tell this was the first human interaction these guys have had in a very, very long time. Very long time. And after a few minutes, I thank them for their time, and we walk away. And I kneel down, and I say, Aiden, what just happened? And Aiden thinks for a moment, and he says, Baba, I made the world a better place, and it feels good. And when I think about that story, and I think about the Jewish people in the state of Israel, we are taught that the world stands on 3 things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. The world stands on Torah, which I really equate to in this particular instance as values. The Jewish people have an amazing set of values, but I understand Tal Kenan yesterday was here, they also talked about values. We all know that the Jewish people don't have the intellectual property locked down on values. That is a universal human yearning. Muslims, Christians, Jews, we all have this. But the Jewish people have a pretty amazing set of values. So, Torah, Avodah, hard work. 70 years ago, the state of Israel came into existence. A country of refugees, a country that couldn't rub 2 shekels together, and now is an economic superpower. Literally, is the world's one and only water superpowers. More stars combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. Friends, I want you to know I wake up every day and I say Shechianu. I wish I was just telling you this because it's part of the talk. I wake up every day and I say Shechianu. I literally cannot believe that I literally have to rub my eyes and I say, we're experiencing the state of Israel and all the miracles that this represents. We have been waiting for this moment for 2,000 years, and 70 years ago, no one could have predicted that Israel is such an innovative place. With all of its problems and all of the issues that it faces, we have never ever seen such a strong, vibrant country and top 10 happy places in the world. You know, Shimon Peres used to say the Jewish people are only happy when they're unhappy. Okay? And the state of Israel truly embodies that today. And lastly, Gemilut Chasadim, the idea of acts of charity and kindness. And Israel today is leveraging its best asset, tech, in order to make the world a better place. And there's a few things I'd like for you to think about today when I leave here. Really, 2 things. One, I want you to ask yourself, what can I do to tie my community in a more positive, happy sense, more innovative way to the state of Israel? Leah asked me, she said, Avi, I know this is not your thing, but I really want you to think about how can our communities, how can we tie them to the state of Israel in an unusual sort of way? So as I went to bed last night, I thought about this. I don't have for you, I'd love to, I understand we're all going to go to our tables in a little bit after Q&A and discuss this. But here are a few ideas for you just off the bat, okay? United Hatzalah. Why can't we have this model in your communities around the country? Just one, right? This idea of really, if you don't want to have ambicycles, really having emergency responders around your communities. 1. 2, you don't want to get so high tech? Let's talk about medical clowns. I was at AIPAC's policy conference last year, and I want you to know, I was moved by these medical clowns. These clowns are literally, we all know about these clowns, they're in hospitals, great. But these are not just clowns. These are people that are trained as nurses and doctors that literally go in to these hospitals and really help treat. They stand side by doctors. And interestingly, Some of you are fans of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, other of you are not fans of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel a few weeks ago was asked a really interesting question, which really took me back. I was really shocked. They said, you know, the next major natural disaster in the world, why don't you send in a few reporters and a few less doctors and a few more reporters and photographers and to do like really tell this story, to tell the world that Israel is doing great things. And the Prime Minister looked at this reporter, like literally like something that was not quite right with him, and it gave him what I think was the quintessentially Jewish answer. He said, what are you kidding me? If I have to send one more doctor, I have to choose between a doctor and a reporter to tell a story, I'm going to send another doctor every day of the week. This is not even close. This is not even close. Let fewer people know about the story, but we save more lives. That is really where it's at. And so medical clowns is one more idea for you. I mean, I literally could go down the list, but medical clowns, United Hatzalah. Anyone here from Chicago, from Illinois? Okay, so no one's here represented from Illinois. The city of Chicago, the south side of Chicago, there's an organization called Natal. Anyone heard of Natal? It's using PTSD and essentially bringing wounded warriors back into the community in a way to like really reduce symptoms as they're related to PTSD. The south side of Chicago today is employing these very same tactics, leveraging them through churches, and I wonder, in some of your communities, could you go through Natal? And literally, we can go through and think about other innovative things that are coming out of the state of Israel today. You can employ some ideas. What can you tie your communities in an innovative way back to the state of Israel? The second thing I want you to think about is as follows. I want you to look to the person to your left. And I want you to look to the person to your right. And I want you to realize, because I realize in talking to you, I want you to know, I don't get nervous talking in front of crowds. I mean, I've done this millions of times. I don't know, millions, but many times. And coming here today, I feel like I am talking to the best and the brightest. You represent, really, you are our Sherpas. You are our leaders. I am extraordinarily privileged to have a reason to talk to you today. But when you look to the person to your left and you look to the person to your right, I want you to realize the only people that are going to move the dial on the issues that we care about are you. You are our force multipliers. It's from you that's going to spread forth these great ideas that is going to truly influence hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in this country. It's you. It's you. And so I want you to think about what Ben-Gurion said. Ben-Gurion said, we are privileged. We have the privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the greatest challenges of the 20th century. I'm looking at you and I'm telling you, you have the privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. And I have never, ever been more hopeful. Yes, we can. We can do it because we have all of the tools. All of the tools are here. It's just a question of figuring out what tools are going to work. But we have amazing communities. The state of Israel is highly innovative. And it's not just a good story. This is reality. Tap into it. Inspire your communities. Take them to the state of Israel. Next time you go, don't just go to the Kotel. Don't just go to Masada. Go to United Hatzalah's headquarters. Go see that Muslims, Christians, and Jews can work together to save lives. Go to the Weizmann Institute and see where Rebbe and Kopakson are creative. Go see the medical clowns at Hadassah University. These are the stories that are going to inspire your children and your grandchildren. This is the story that's going to tie them to the state of Israel, and I believe turn the tide. And instead of turning their back on the state of Israel, turn their front to the state of Israel. Thank you on behalf of the community.
Elevating the mundane and making it holy and bringing us from darkness to light. When I look left and I look right, I can say around this room, I'm really amazed at just how smart Avi is that in 45 minutes he was able to figure out that we are the brightest. Really just zoomed it out of there. So questions?
Whoa!
No. That would be the equivalent of like a Jewish mic drop. You got it? Okay, any questions for Avi? That's not possible.
Jews, no questions? C'est pas possible. Yeah,
Okay.
Michael.
First of all, thank you.
Thank you.
state of Israel, state of Israel, state of Israel. But it seems to me that it's more people of Israel.
The people of Israel ultimately are the state of Israel. The state of Israel encapsulates Muslims, Christians, and Jews. You know, interestingly, if you want to just is your question really about the other individuals in Israel?
No, my question is, shouldn't we focus, instead of making the connection with the state, making the connection with the people, because it's about the peoplehood, instead of the state of
So
Israel?
Avraham talks about this. We are all here. What connects us all is the people of Israel. I connect to that very, very deeply. This idea of the state of Israel, you're right. But ultimately, it's this idea that we all intuitively understand the state. But ultimately, to forge a connection, it's going to be one individual to the next. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And certainly the idea of the people of Israel is much larger than just Jews, but it's Christians and Muslims as well. I couldn't agree more.
So obviously Netanyahu is exactly correct that you always send the doctor every time, it's not even a question. And at the same time, we do a really crappy job of telling the world the story. We just do. We're not like, most people don't know the story of everything that you just said.
I didn't know this story.
Right,
Part of
so we absolutely must figure out a better way of telling the world that story. How are we going to do that?
You ready? What's your name?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hereby appoint you and everyone else in the room ambassadors of the state of Israel. There are no shortcuts here. You know, I have my son's godfather is a Muslim guy from Egypt. He always says to me, and he's a sweet guy, he's like, Avi, there are no secrets. There are no secrets. I mean, each and every one of us, it's not incumbent upon us to complete the task, but nor are we to desist from it either, right? Every one of you that are disparate communities around the states, you have the ability to tell this story. I'm looking at, you have the ability to write op-eds. You have the ability to tell this story, hold events, hold Z3 conferences. I mean, there are so many things we can do to tell the story. Now, I will tell you, I think we are finally changing the tide. As I look forward, as I look over the course of the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, I don't think we're going to be looking at the same story. I really think that we're at tipping points.
Why?
I'll tell you why. Let's just look at a few examples. First of all, the world is experiencing massive challenges when it comes to food security, water security, artificial intelligence, global climate change, when it comes to poverty. Israel is solving some of the gravest challenges that have faced humanity ever. And when I think about these massive challenges, and I think of solutions, the people of Israel are solving them. Not just the state of Israel, the people of Israel are solving them. And so when you look forward, you say, wow, if these challenges we're finding solutions, people are going to naturally turn to Israel to solve them. Every major company in the world has already voted with their feet. Okay? Top 500 companies in the world have research and development firms, they've got R&D centers, they've got Google, Facebook, Microsoft, so on and so forth. They've all voted with their feet. They're all in Israel. The UN, a body that we don't tend to think of as being particularly pro-Israel. If you look at it in the last 3-4 years, we're literally seeing from more no's, we're seeing more abstentions. And we're seeing that trend line. Israel today, look, the Prime Minister was in Chad last week. Look at all these countries that are basically establishing diplomatic relations with the state of Israel. We're not talking about, I don't know if any of you read Mark Schneier's piece in the Times of Israel last week. He's basically saying, and a lot of others are saying, Bahrain is really on the precipice of recognizing the state of Israel. You have the Prime Minister having gone to Oman, Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is an unprecedented moment in Jewish history. This is unprecedented. So when I think about the confluence of innovation and challenges and the world changing, I believe that in the next 5-10 years we're going to see a different Israel in terms of its perception of the world. And frankly, each and every one of you has a role to play in changing that narrative. But ultimately, so do your children. I mean, look, let me just give you one more vignette, if you allow me. Not only do I take my children every year to Israel, Zach will appreciate this, I take my kids every year to Policy Conference. Okay, I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3.5-year-old. Starting at 4, everyone goes to Policy Conference. Now, I don't take them for the full 3 days of the 18,000 people craziness. I bring them for 3 hours. And I bring them, how many of you have been to Policy Conference? So almost everyone in the room. I bring them to the village. Why do I bring them to the village? Because these innovations that literally allow my children to touch and smell this in a fundamentally different sort of way. Last year, for those of you who were at Policy Conference last year, and this really made an indelible mark on my kid. Last year, we went and we were at the Village, and they brought the Iron Dome. This was the first time the battery had basically gone to a public setting. And my now 6-year-old, who was then 2, he looked at me, literally tugged at my suit. He said, "Papa, is that what saved our lives?" And you say, "Oh, come on, yeah, that's what saved our lives." And so these are the things that when I think about, look, everyone in this room is over the age of 40. I'm being kind, right? Like, we're over 40. We're like, passé. We're passing the baton on to our children, our grandchildren. That's why you are here to empower the next generation. And the way, I think, the most positive way of doing that is through these innovations. Israel's not a perfect place. Israel has its problems, but we want more of these sorts of innovation. Israel is like the United States, and I think it's what ties the United States and the state of Israel at its most basic. It's an aspirational country. We all know Israel isn't a perfect place, but we aspire for a more perfect union. That's why we aspire. This is basically part of our DNA as the Jewish people. We want to make this better. So with all its problems, we say, yeah, yes, we can make this better. Yes, we have a role to make this better. And so what can you do in your communities? You can highlight these stories. You can basically take them to these events, your children and your grandchildren, to things that will inspire them. On your next trip to Israel, not just Masada, but Weizmann, but Technion, but United Hatzalah. Have a Z3 in your community. I want you to know, I went to Z3. That's where I met Leah. For me, it was the first conference, and I go to conferences all the time. I was telling Zach before we were here tonight. I love the fact that it was the speakers that got together on day 2 in a off-the-record, closed-door session of how do we tackle some of these great challenges. That was, for me, the most interesting. And I feel like in this room today, we're in that same sort of setting. We're here with the professionals. Amongst ourselves, how do we figure out these innovative ways of the next generation of time to the Jewish people in the state of Israel?
Big round of applause for us. I think we have one more lesson, which is that if you really want to innovate, you just need to hang out with Zach Bodnar at Z3. And now that he's funded as heavily as he is, we should all be. I was actually waiting for Avi to say, and so, here's another check for Z3. We got about 20 minutes to work at our tables. Now that we've really been inspired, I want to say that it was a wonderful thing to sit and to listen to Avi re-infuse us with the things to be proud of. Not just proud of about the state of Israel. I'm a little suspect on his counting. I was facing in the front row, and so every time he said, "So almost everyone in the room," he asked about APAC policy conference, and like 12 people raised their hands and said, "So almost everyone in the room." Yeah, it's okay. Listen, no one else was looking around, so we fell for it. But as a whole, if you listen to this and you don't find those good things to be proud of about in the state of Israel or what we do together as a field, we've really lost the hope for that future going forward, and it's time to take what we've learned and really move forward, and Avi's going to take us forward.
One more thing. Each and every one of you is going to get a copy of the book today. And I have 2 asks today. One, I hope you will read it. And then the book really is a rocking chair book. No chapters more than 3,500 words, and the reason why is because we know that people don't read today. I mean, truly, let's be honest, people don't read. My wife jokes, she calls it a toilet book. I mean, but really, it was meant to really keep you engaged. These are very, very short chapters. So one, I hope that you will read it. But more importantly, when I come to Zach's house at the next C3, I don't want to see it on your bookshelf. I want you to give it to somebody else. Please. Read it, make the story your own, literally read it, internalize it, and then give it to somebody else. 1. And 2, I've asked Leah's permission. I'd like to, if it's okay, if you want to opt out, just let Leah know that you're opting out. She's very kindly offered to give me your email addresses to at least add you to the op-eds that I put out specifically on tech in Israel. If you want to opt out, no harm, just go to Leah and tell her at the very end. And if you have questions, if you want to be in touch, I put my email address in every one of the books. Feel free to reach out to me at any time if I can be helpful to your community in any way, shape, or form, either with questions or with op-ed ideas or how to leverage the ideas in the book. Please don't be shy. I really want to act as a resource to your communities. Please leverage me. I'd be delighted to do so. So thank you very much.